Hi everyone, in this video, we're going to finish up our chapter on monopolies and look at what types of policy do we have regarding monopolies. So within the past couple of videos, we kind of seen that as a society, it's kind of reasonable to not really like monopolies all that much. We saw they raised prices. They kind of hurt the consumers compared to a perfectly competitive market. So we're going to see what types of policy we have for them in the real world. How do we regulate them, and how do we keep our monopolies in check, and keep them from taking advantage of consumers, uh, and just keep them from doing that. So the first way we kind of have is we have our what are called antitrust laws. Um, what the goal of these is going to be to increase our competition. And the two kind of big staple laws that we have, if you're interested, you can kind of look them up. We're going to cover the gist of what they cover. But the two main ones are Sherman Antitrust and the Clayton Antitrust Act. And kind of the three overarching themes of these two pieces of legislation is going to be, first, they prevent mergers. Or another way to think about that is they're going to prevent mergers from two companies that control too much of one market. So if, say, Chase Bank and Boone, First Bank of Boone, wanted to merge, probably wouldn't be a big deal. But if Chase and Bank of America were to merge, two of the larger banks in the nation, right, we might have a problem then. So with this preventing mergers, it's largely preventing one company from being too large. The second really big topic covered by these laws is they're going to break up companies. And when we say break up, we might think about a company that maybe gets too much market share. The SEC or FTC might come through and say, "Hey, you have too much market share, so you need to break up into a number of companies." A big example of this was AT&T, and what they had to do was break up into a lot of the different Bell telephone companies. So in the 80s, 90s, AT&T became too big, pretty much controlled the entire country's telecommunication services. So we didn't like that. We said, "Hey, you're too big." So we broke them up, and today we have Southern Bell, Northwest Pacific Bell, so on and so on. A couple companies that may soon be in this breakup companies category might be Google. Uh, we know Google has, right, they have a lot of control, and day by day we use probably Google for every single piece of operation. They own YouTube. They have the search engine. Google Maps is used by a lot of people on their phones. So at some point we might see them come up and be on that chopping block of being told, "Hey, you got to break up and become a number of different companies." Then this third one is preventing companies from coordinating their activities. Basically, what we have here is it's illegal to collude, or collusion laws. So if you and I own a gas station across the street from each other, and we're the last gas station for 300 miles, we cannot we can't agree to charge $10 a gallon, right? We have to compete against each other, and if we were to take in that in collusion, and which is an uncompetitive practice, we would end up being in trouble because we're taking advantage of customers in a bad situation, or in that situation. Another big type of legislation that we have is going to be what's called predatory pricing laws. And with predatory pricing, Walmart has been guilty of this in the past. What we might see is that a company will come in and they'll sell their goods at an extremely low cost in order to get rid of their competition. Then once their competition's gone, they'll raise the prices back up. Uh, in general, and not to pick on Walmart, but it's something that they have done in the past, and they've had to pay fines and make up for that practice they've done in the past. So it's another type of legislation that comes along with these antitrust laws. The second type of thing that we can do to help with monopolies and to help keep them in check is to regulate them. And with this, so before we were looking at business practices, With this type of regulation, we're going to more look at their behaviors. And the big thing we're looking at now is the prices they can charge. So for a monopolist, for the most part, we're going to see their marginal cost is going to be less than our average total cost. And that's kind of one of the benefits of being a monopolist. So when we think about how we're going to regulate them, we don't want our monopolists to come in and just rip everybody off, charge 100 times their marginal cost, depending on the product maybe. But what we'll do is we might say, hey, you can only charge so much. So we might say that your price has to be equal to average total cost, which results in zero economic profit. Or we might do is come through and we might establish like a legal profit margin. Right, so we might tell monopolists you can only make 10% profit on this product, and if they want to make more, if they want to raise prices, they have to seek legislative permission to do so. So a big area where we see this regulation come in is our utilities. And when we think about this, if we think about Mid-American, right, so for the most part, if you have an electric bill, you're paying Mid-American Energy for it. Some people might have Alliant, but for the most of us, it's probably Mid-American. If they want to raise their prices, they have to go to the Iowa Utility Board and request that those prices get increased, and they have to be able to justify it, and then Iowa Utility Board has to approve it. And with this system, they approve a price rise that the population doesn't really justify, we do have that option to vote our representatives out of the Iowa House or Iowa Senate. So we have a way to kind of control them in that sense of voting, but they have a process to be able to raise their prices. And the third kind of tool that we have to work with monopolies is going to be our public ownership. And when we think about public ownership, two big examples that we come across are going to be Amtrak, schools, and the post office. So in this sense, what we're going to do is we're going to say that basically the government is going to own whatever service we're talking about. So when we have our public ownership, we have a couple issues that potentially come up, and whether or not we like it or not, it's going to be totally up to you. But the big thing that comes up with this is that the ownership or whoever owns it actually affects our incentives and how we act. So if you own a private business, you can say Dutch oven, you can say wherever you want, right? If you own a private business, if things don't go your way, if you don't work to minimize your costs, maximize profits, at some point, more than likely, you'll be pushed out of business, right? Because your prices might be too high, or if you're not providing good service, people won't go to your store, whatever the case is. However, when we have government ownership of a good, if they provide bad service or whatever the case is, in this case, government has that monopoly. So really the losers are customers and taxpayers, in the sense that if they don't provide a good service or they go way above budget, you just tax people more, and then boom, the money shows up, you're good to go. As a result of this incentive, oftentimes we see that our public ownership becomes less efficient, mainly because you just don't have that incentive to minimize your costs. So when we think about government, oftentimes one of the problems we have is there's a lot of bloat is kind of the thing. And kind of the running joke is that, oh, well, if you want something done with government, you got to sign a form. You have to have a form to sign a form. And with government, you have to have meetings to set up meetings, right? Whereas in the private sector, you're more able to just, oftentimes, it's more of a streamlined process. Right? If you think about your home, if you want to fix something at your home, which is kind of the most private there can be, you just get it done. Whereas if The city wanted to put in a new bench somewhere, right? They have to go through paperwork and get votes and all that great stuff just to get that done. So when we're deciding about public ownership, though, it can go a number of ways, and there are ways to kind of make it better. So two of the areas that have competition are schools and the post office. So the post office has to compete with UPS and FedEx. As a result, we have actually seen better service from them. Their prices are across the board lower, but uh, kind of used to be the running joke that, oh, if you send something to the post office, maybe it gets to you. Whereas, at least in my life, I have seen very good service from the post office. Things have gotten to me with no problem. Then with our schools, again, we're in a public school, and the public schooling system is very popular. It's a very big thing here in the States. But one of the things that we have with our public school is a private education system. Uh, and that kind of provides a benefit to the public schools in that the public schools have to provide a similar product, or they have to compete with that private ownership in order to keep students. So that that competitive factor in our schooling more or less helps us and makes your public schools have to compete with the private schools, right? You have to have a reason to want to go there other than just the lower cost. Uh, a side where we see it kind of not work that great is Amtrak. So if you're interested and you want to look into it, feel free to do so. But one of the things we see with Amtrak is, and especially right now, they have 43 or 44 routes in the country, and like two of them are profitable. So Amtrak as a whole just loses a ton of money. Their reliability isn't that great, and overall, while it might be fun to ride a train, if you have like serious travel that you need to get done, for the most part, you're not going to be relying on Amtrak for that. Um, and if we think about Amtrak compared to the other two schools in the USPS, there is no functioning private rail to kind of give them an incentive to boost their performance. So, right, and they also don't have that incentive to really lower their costs because, again, if they're operating at a loss, government just gets more money from taxpayers to subsidize that loss. So with these, we have a few ways that few types of public policy to help keep our monopolies in control. As always, if you have anything, feel free to let me know.